Where would you rank the Florida State Seminoles in the ACC power rankings? I have them number one, and this podcast is going to break down why.
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into another episode of Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith. Thank you for listening each and every day. I truly appreciate building this brand, and it's a lot of fun here at the Locked On Network. Your team every day. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, on Odyssey, Apple, anywhere you want. Please like and share this podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the best teams in the ACC. It's the path to get to the college football playoffs, so you got to do the first things first. 4-0 is a good start, and Florida State is also 2-0 in the league. I think that you're looking at a team that can do pretty much whatever it wants in terms of finishing out this year. It's two of their toughest games are already done with being not only toughest in the ACC, they're road games. They won at BC. It's just a weird place to play. And then they won at Clemson this past weekend. So a lot of fun to talk about Florida State and all the things that they've done so far. It's 8 more games, though, and that's what this is about. We're going to back up a little bit of the stats from the 4 games, compare it to some other teams in each segment, and then we're going to kind of go through and just look at it on how do they get, like the third segment's about ACC champs. What do you have to do, and what does that mean long-term for the playoffs? That's today's show in a nutshell. It is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's start off with some basic things. You know how much I love statistics if you watch this show at all. Well, here's the number one thing to understand beyond the numbers: balance. I went through a gazillion stats looking at Florida State, Clemson, Duke, different teams in the league. Florida State is the most balanced team regardless of how I look at it. And I also want to combine that with the following statement. Among all the teams in the Atlantic Coast Conference, the Noles are the only team to have 2 quality wins away from home. The first game, obviously, was against LSU in Orlando, and then they just went to Death Valley to win against Clemson. There was an interesting stat. They hadn't lost a game at home by more than like 1 point in like a decade. They just really are tough to play at home. Well, here's the deal. Florida State, they get those 2 wins. They have the majority of their games remaining at home. And while there's certainly difficult games ahead and they're off this week, you got to look at something very interesting. I've got my rankings and everything sitting here. They don't play Carolina and they don't play Louisville. Those are 2 of the teams in the ACC I put in the top 6. And anytime you play somebody in the top half of any league, that's a quality football team. But not playing either one of them is unique. Secondly, they get the 2 teams that I do think are the toughest teams left on the ACC slate at home in Doak Campbell Stadium. Just want to kind of throw that out there. They will play Duke and Miami at home. Obviously, you'd rather be at home than on the road. Just kind of wanted to throw that in there. All right, let's start off with offense. Why the Noles are doing so well. They are 8th in the country in scoring, 43.3 points. Remember me mentioning balance? There's part of it. They've been able to run the ball when they really needed to. Thank you to the LSU game. By the way, they just ran over LSU at the end of that contest. And then the passing game is doing quite well. Jordan Travis is big play Jordan. I mean, that guy throws the ball inconsistently. Sometimes he'll have some misses. But when it's money time, like the pass to Keon in overtime for the touchdown, you're not going to find a better pass anybody's made this year than that throw. Great catch too. But that was pretty good coverage, and he threw it in the bucket. That's how you win football games. Let's talk a little bit about total offense. Again, it's about balance. Florida State's run game is not where it needs to be, and they've had to rely on passing a little bit. Part of that's Jordan banged up, so he's not running as often. Fair enough. They are still 47th in the nation, despite those 2 tough games in total offense and Jordan being banged up and having guys out on the offensive line. It's pretty miraculous to be where they are. 427.3 yards per game. If they were healthy, they would be around 500, pretty conservatively. Not running Jordan Travis completely changes every game. He obviously didn't have much going on in terms of designed runs and RPOs. And they're not going to admit it, but you can tell they don't want him running much. He's banged up. Fair enough. And that guy grinds out, and that's an extra big props to him. They're also 10th in the nation, or 10 of them, 19th in the nation with plays of 30 or more yards passing. They've had 10 of them. When you hit plays down the field like that, it changes what everybody does on the back end. I've talked about that before, and I could have used more stats, but that's just one out of that. You absolutely have to be able to hit down the field passes. You're not going to win a championship even at the ACC level unless you can throw over the top. As an example of another team that's a good football team, and they're going to play them in about a month, Duke. They only throw the ball so much. They try to play defense, eat up the clock. They've got a good D. And Riley Leonard, is a good quarterback, but he only averages about 196 yards passing a game. They don't have a Keon Coleman. They got good receivers, but they don't have a Johnny Wilson. Florida State takes a step up, and they both beat Clemson. Florida State did it in a different way, and hats off to Duke for the way they did it. But the talent's still there for Florida State, and I think it'll bear out when they play on the field. Assuming that Florida State's healthy, they should win that game. A couple other key stats here. 47.1%. That's the number of times teams enter the red zone against the Noles defense and actually score a touchdown. Not scoring percentage, but a touchdown. I don't care. If you kick a field goal against a team and you've entered the red zone, you've honestly not won that part of the drive. That's how defensive coordinators look at it, so that's how I'm going to take it. Florida State's pretty good with that. They're 38th in the nation, and again, they played two big-time teams. If they'd have played 3 or 4, like if they had Michigan's schedule against us, they'd be in the top 10. Michigan's schedule is a joke. Florida State's got 2 teams they played that are quality football teams in LSU and Clemson. Let's talk about turnover margin. Again, with 2 top teams and Florida State having a couple of goofy plays go against them, they're still only 37th in the nation. Not great, but again, what would it be if they were playing against Michigan's schedule and some other teams that have played a bunch of cupcakes? That's not too bad considering the teams they went up against with all the NFL talent. And then the other thing I just want to talk about, again, just overall, Florida State's banged up, especially on the O-line. I talked about that quite a bit in the last few days. They're going to improve in these categories. And I think turnovers will be a big one because they will be in more manageable situations. That's a projection, and I get all that. But the more important thing isn't the ACC rankings now for what I'm doing. It's at the end of the year. Florida State's just been more banged up early than some teams have. They got some guys they're going to get back. That's going to help quite a bit. And I also think that you're talking about a scenario where Florida State is still gelling a little bit with some of the transfers, and it's getting better. You're going to see more chemistry as this year goes on, and you're going to see them get some more turnovers. The secondary had some busts and whatnot in the last few weeks. They're going to make more plays on the ball, and they had some pretty good ones considering they were playing a lot of man coverage against Clemson and a lot of quarters, which is basically a form of man. You're going to see some more turnovers from the Noles D. Just my prediction. As far as the teams that I think are right there, they're competing with, it won't shock anybody. Obviously, Clemson's a little down because they got beat twice. I have them at number 5. Number 4, I got Duke. I like what they're doing. I'm not sure they have the depth to sustain. I'll get into that a little bit more in segment 2. And then I also have North Carolina. I'm always fearful of Drake May. Again, the Noles don't play them in the regular season, but Carolina's scheduled the way it breaks down. They've got a big game against Miami coming up. If they win that game, big if, they've got a great chance to be like 10-0, 11-0, something like that, getting ready at the end of the year. They don't have a great schedule. So that's an interesting team. And then Miami's went way up. They've changed their roster by 40 players. They're a lot like Florida State. They used the transfer portal, et cetera, and had a good recruiting class. We'll see. They've got a big game, like I said, coming up against UNC. So that game's going to change a lot of things. But those are the top 2 teams, in my opinion, right now in the league. If you want to talk about Florida State beating everybody on their schedule and all that, again, the reason I bring this up is not just national title, because you got to win your league before you can get the national title. Just wanted to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the teams they've got to be careful of in more specifics in segment 2. Also going to talk a little bit about the opportunities for Florida State to make some national noise and not just winning games, like how you do it, the pizzazz that goes with it. That's going to be segment 2. Now, with that, please note that we have a really cool show that's going on with Locked On Network. The Locked On College Football Kickoff show is fantastic. I've been a part of it. It's every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. on the YouTube channels. It's right here on Locked On Seminoles on the YouTube channel, and you can go to any of them on YouTube and see it. And it's also taped. So if you want to come back and check it out later, if you're at work or whatever, you can. 2-hour show. It's going to break down all the different big games, the interesting highlights and stuff that have been going on in college football. It may talk a little injury. It's going to talk matchups. It's going to talk about coaches, all the things going on. And once we get to the offseason, there'll be some different things we probably do too that are kind of related. But right now, it's every week, Friday, 11 to 1. It's a lot of fun, and everybody should check it out. All right. We're going to talk about some of the teams that Florida State has to be a little careful of. And we have some stats we can kind of go over, but I'm just going to talk about the top teams in the league. And it's not really all that shocking, but I'm going to start out. I'm going to just go 5, 4, 3, and 2. And I'm just, for fun, I'll put in a little bit about Louisville. I just want people to know what the deal is with them. Again, this is a team that Florida State's not playing. And Louisville has the easiest schedule in the ACC. They got a really good running back. Jawar Jordan, 9.6 yards a carry. Out of everybody in the top 10 in the nation in rushing, in which he has won, he has the highest yards per carry average. He's a dude. And their quarterback is a fifth-year senior. They're kind of a quiet team. It could be a team Florida State sees in the ACC title game. They could sneak in. Again, their schedule is ridiculously easy. They have a chance. Just want to mention that. Clemson, obviously, they're a good football team, but they screwed their chances up. I got them number 5. They played Duke. They played Duke and they played Florida State. They had a chance in both games, and they came out with a loss in each. I think there'll be a team that still finishes in the top 5. Wouldn't be surprising me if they won out or maybe lost one more game. They still have quality on their roster. Number 4 is the most unique to me, and I watched, before I did this podcast, I watched their game against Pittsburgh, going through, looking at different plays, rewinding. A couple of notes about them. I look at them differently than some other teams because Drake May makes up for so much. Drake May, if Florida State ends up playing them in the ACC title game, I think they would give North Carolina a ton of problems, and it's the same on both sides of the ball. They're not physical enough consistently. Florida State is not great at running the ball. I've made that very obvious based on their less than stellar performance in Death Valley in that regard, but they got to have guys out. The first game of the year, Carolina got 9 sacks against South Carolina, a team with a terrible O-line. In the 3 games since, they've got a combined 3 sacks. On top of that, they've got a couple really talented running backs, and when they go up against quality teams, you know what? They're just not getting it done. They rely too much on Drake. He has to run sometimes, and he's a phenomenal player, and I expect him to go on to the NFL and be great. But he can only do so much, and he doesn't block and tackle. This would be a bad matchup for North Carolina if they played the Noles in the ACC title game. And again, they could. As mentioned in segment 1, when I had them ranked, I've got them 3rd with Duke. You could switch North Carolina and Duke, ironic, because they're so much alike in terms of some of the things they do. Both have mobile quarterbacks and their arch rivals. But whichever way you want to put it, 3rd or 4th, you could go either. Carolina's the team to be. I think they'll eventually slide below Duke. I'll give them the edge right now because I just love Drake May. But at the same time, they aren't physical enough running downhill. Florida State would give them a ton of problems because they would get their hands on enough Drake May passes to slow him down, and he'd be in too many 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7s because their run game isn't consistent. And it's sad because they got a couple of really good running backs. I just don't think that's going to get it done. The team that's goofy to me to try to grade is Duke. 2 points about them. Number 1, they play Notre Dame this coming weekend. Game day is going there. I don't think they'll do very well. I don't think they're physical enough in terms of depth. I think their starters can compete with about anybody. Clemson can assure you of that. But they don't have enough playmakers outside. As I mentioned, in segment 1, they throw for about 196 yards a game. Part of that is their design. The coaching staff knows they're not trotting out first and second round picks at receiver, tight end, etc. They've got good players, some guys that might make the NFL, but they're not dominant. Riley Leonard's a dude, though. He figures it out. He's a former basketball player that was recruited. He's from the Mobile, Alabama area. Decided to go football late, and Duke got a steal. Can they line up and play power football against Notre Dame, against Florida State, teams like that, when you don't have dominant guys outside? And like Notre Dame is going to smother them. They've got 2 NFL corners, and they're going to try to make Riley Leonard beat them with his receivers. I guarantee you that's what they're going to do. And I think that's what Florida State would try to do as well. Florida State has better talent in their secondary, although I agree before for people that are out there saying, well, we've had busts and all that. Florida State has, but especially if you just play man, I think that would give Duke some problems. I also don't think, unlike Clemson, that Florida State or Notre Dame or anybody else they play that's a good team would be good enough without the help of bumbling the football. I mean, the Clemson game was just bizarre. Clemson would march down the field, eat up a ton of clock, and then not score with turnover. They completely shot themselves in the foot. Florida State's pretty good at holding on to the football. I don't think they're going to have that many problems. I think Florida State's got 3 turnovers or whatever. They're good at holding on to the ball. They'll be fine. Duke just shouldn't be able to beat Florida State. That game's coming up in a few weeks. We'll see. But unless there's a fluke play like a block punt, an interception return, or like Florida State misses 2 field goals and then their punter's back, like you have to give them advantages yard-wise and just flat take points off your own board, or you're not going to have any problems against them, in my opinion. I'm not saying that's perfect. That's just how I look at it. The last team is the arch rival, and that's Miami. A few things about them that makes you think Miami's at least turning the corner, heading back. I still need to see more, but at the same time, they got the game in the middle of October, so that'll tell a lot. They got Georgia Tech next. Like Florida State, they're off this week. Georgia Tech's solid. They'll give them a test, but I don't think they have enough depth to hang with Miami. Key stat for them is their run defense. It is legit. 48 yards per game allowed. That is nasty. They've got some guys hurt up front on defense too, so that's pretty impressive. They hit the big play on offense. Miami has 3 receivers that can be their number 1 on any given day. That's what gave A&M fits, and it's why Miami smoked them. They dropped 48 on them, even though they had 2 complete blunders on special teams. That game in Doak Campbell Stadium on the 11th of November could end up being one of the 5 most important games in the college football season. Both these teams are trending up. I would expect both of them to be at 9 or 10 wins at that point, because the ACC at the top's not what it used to be, and they've both ascended. It'd be kind of cool if they're both in the top 10. It wouldn't shock me. We'll have to wait and see, but I think there's a chance of that. The other thing with Miami, Van Dyke is healthy. That changes things. He was terrible last year when he was banged up and he was getting hit with the bad O-line. That game on November 11th could be a really, really great game. So I think that it's cool for college football to have teams kind of change at the top, but the rivalry games, I mean, let's be honest, that's a big part of it too. If you don't like rivalry games, then I'm not really sure what the deal is for you. Segment 3, I'm going to talk about why being ACC champs matters. And again, getting to the college football playoff and how FSU will look at this as part of the process. And that includes the ACC title game. I'll talk a little bit about that as well, who I think it can be and should be in segment 3. First off, DoorDash. Need fresh groceries for the week, but don't have the time to go to the store? Try grocery delivery from DoorDash. You'll get everything you want delivered when you need it right to your door. It's a convenient way to save you time without the hassle and get the food you want and eat. As someone that's benefited from DoorDash, whether it's from restaurants, whether it's from being at one of my friends' houses and having something ordered because we were going to cook and we forgot an ingredient, don't want to talk about how many times I had to do something like that. I can guarantee you DoorDash is a great way to go. Get 50% off your first DoorDash order up to $20 value when you use code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout. Limited time offer, terms do apply. That's 50% off up to $20, non-minimum subtotal, and 0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app in the App Store and enter code LOCKEDONCollege. Don't forget, that's code LOCKEDONCollege for 50% off your first order with DoorDash. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the overall ACC point here and why it matters. Number one, Florida State, let's be honest, until last year, they had 4 bad years. Let's just state facts. So to say we're back, you got to win your own freaking league. Okay? You got to win your own league. That's one. 2, if you win the regular season and then you also win the ACC title game, that's that extra little shit that you can throw in the pile to get yourself in the playoff. Now, I don't know who the heck it's going to be. The ACC's mumbled about every year, but I just went through the teams. If I had to guess, and this may surprise some people, but if I had to guess who it's going to be, I'm going to say North Carolina or Louisville is going to be the most likely to be on that edge at the end because of their schedules. And then the other team, again, is Miami. Duke, I think, is at a disadvantage for the following reasons, just in case you were wondering. Number one, they play Notre Dame this week. While not an ACC member, that's a lot of attrition you're going to take against a really powerful football team up front, just the way they play physically on both sides, more chance for injuries. And I don't think they have the depth that some of the other teams do. They won that Clemson game, and I'm not taking anything away from Duke. They're not going to end up playing Florida State, in my opinion, in the ACC title game because, quite frankly, they just don't have the same depth. From the back half of the season, let's see what the numbers are for Duke. And this is historically the case. Teams that are kind of fringe, good programs in any conference. It could be Big 10, ACC, Big 12, whatever. Back half of the season is about recruiting. How many D linemen you got you're comfortable with rotating in against a really good guy like Drake May, like Jordan Travis? Good luck with that. I don't think Florida State's going to be as worried about Duke's depth as they will Miami's. Sorry, that's just the way it is. As for Louisville, again, their schedule is ridiculous. The way it just fell, it's pretty easy. They do have Miami, but they don't play the Noles for one. It's going to be a little bit easier for them to get there. The only question I have about them, it's first year staff that, their head coach is a Louisville grad, played there and all that. Good coach. I don't think they're in a situation where they're going to get challenged as much as some other teams. They could sneak in. That Miami game is big, and if I remember correctly, it's at Miami, though. That's going to be tough. It could end up being a rematch, Miami and Florida State. It wouldn't shock me. The other opportunity, again, is Carolina. They don't play Florida State in the regular season. Drake May gives them a chance, but I just don't like their physicality. If I had to guess, I would say it's going to be the Canes. Regardless of how this goes in the regular season, beating them in the second game, let's say Miami gets beat by Florida State the first time. It's hard to beat a team two times in a season. There's been a lot of cases where those things have happened, but that might be what Florida State needs to do. Now, here's the interesting part as it relates to the college football playoff, and I'm just going to throw out a scenario. Noles go 12-0. They lose to Miami in the ACC title game, get beat 31-28, whatever. At undefeated, you would think they'd be ranked number 2 or 3 going into that game. With the win over Miami in the regular season, what would the playoff committee do? It's one of the big conundrums that every conference, including the Big 12 at one point, they got rid of it because it cost Oklahoma, forget the year, it cost them a chance to go to the title game because they got beat in the title, Big 12 title. I think it was by K-State, and it just, we don't want it, blah, blah, blah. Well, the money is big too. The TV networks want it. And whether we like it or not, that's the number one thing that everybody wants is money. So I'd be interested to see how that would go if in either direction, like if Miami won the first round and then Florida State beat them in the second round, how would that go? It's a really unique scenario, and I'm always fascinated about that. And of course, how the game's played. Like if Florida State loses 38-10 in the first one and wins the second one, that'd be different. But, that's not likely. I would expect 1 or 2 games between the two, and if it is 2, both of them to be 10 points or less. That's my guess. So anyway, I've got Florida State top of the ACC right now in the power rankings. And I just don't think there's a team that has as much balance as they do, with the final point just being they won 2 big games. I made that point in the opening. I'm making it again now. You beat LSU and you beat Clemson. Both. Not one or the other. Both away from Doak Campbell Stadium and your campus. That's not easy. No other team in college football has quite that combination right now against teams that are tradition-rich and talented football programs. So that's the way I look at it. As the rain goes crazy here where I'm at and causing my lights to flash, I'm going to end this podcast before it gets any crazier. But please like this. Please hit that notification bell. Please make sure you check it out as often as you can and share it. And above all else, for me, make sure that you comment if you're on YouTube. Love to hear what you have to say. Everybody have a great day, and thank you very much.